It all started at the dinner table, a place where families usually laugh, share stories, and feel safe. But in my house, dinner was a battlefield. My mom's voice cut through the silence like a knife. She yelled at me for spilling a glass of water as if I had ruined her entire world. My sister laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that pierced deeper than any insult. And my father? He didn't say a word. He just sat back, smirked, as if my humiliation was his entertainment. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or even a human being to them. I was just the target, the scapegoat, the punching bag of their frustrations. That night, as I sat alone in my room, my phone glowing in the dark, I typed 3 messages. 3 texts that would change everything. This is my story. A story of pain, silence, betrayal, and the night I decided to end it all. But before you judge, before you think you know how it ends, listen carefully, because this isn't just my story. It could be yours. It could be anyone's. It's a story about how easy it is to break someone you claim to love, and how hard it is to fix the damage once it's done. Dinner. For most families, it's supposed to be the one sacred time of the day, a place where laughter echoes, stories are exchanged, and warmth fills the air. But for me, the dinner table was a battlefield. I still remember the sharp sound of porcelain plates hitting the wooden surface, the clatter of silverware, the faint smell of burnt oil clinging to the kitchen walls. My mother's footsteps echoed against the tiles as she slammed a bowl of soup in front of me. The broth splashed over the edge, scalding my fingers. "Can't you even hold a spoon properly?" she snapped, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. I froze, spoon in hand, my heart pounding against my ribs. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Across the table, my sister covered her mouth, but her giggles spilled through her fingers. She wasn't laughing at the soup. She was laughing at me. My father leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth, as if my humiliation were a private show for his amusement. I wanted to disappear, to shrink small enough to fit under the table, to vanish from their sight. But instead, I sat there, trapped. The unspoken rules of our table. In my house, dinner wasn't about food. It was about power. There were unspoken rules carved deep into my memory. Rule 1, do not talk back. Rule 2, do not ask questions. Rule 3, always accept blame even when it isn't yours. Breaking any of those rules meant disaster. One night, I forgot to set the chopsticks on the table. Just chopsticks. Something so small, so trivial. My mother's hand came down on the back of my head so hard my vision blurred. The soup spilled, staining my shirt, and my sister laughed so loud it echoed in my ears long after the meal was over. My father didn't lift a finger. He didn't stop her. He didn't stop anything. He just sat there, chewing slowly, eyes fixed on me like I was nothing more than a pathetic inconvenience. The illusion of a family. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Neighbors waved when they saw us walk down the street together. Teachers praised my parents for raising such polite daughters. Friends who visited would say, "Your family is so close. I wish mine was like that." But they never saw what happened behind closed doors. They didn't see how the smiles vanished once the front door shut. They didn't hear the harsh words that replaced laughter. They didn't know that the dinner table, our supposed family gathering, was a stage for humiliation, punishment, and control. Sometimes I wondered if my parents actually hated me, or worse, if they felt nothing at all. because hate, at least, is still an emotion. What I saw in their eyes was emptier than hate. The taste of silence. I learned early that silence was safer than words. At dinner, I chewed slowly, avoided eye contact, and prayed to become invisible. But silence has a taste. It's bitter, metallic, like blood in the mouth. And every night, I swallowed it. One evening, as I quietly passed the rice bowl to my sister, she sneered. "Finally, you did something right." My father chuckled. My mother didn't even bother to correct her. Their laughter lingered longer than the taste of food. It poisoned the room, seeped into my skin, and carved a message into my heart. You don't belong here. When food becomes fear. For most kids, dinner is comfort. Warm rice, tender meat, fresh vegetables, symbols of care and love. For me, food became fear. The clatter of chopsticks made my hands shake. The smell of soup turned my stomach sour. The sight of my family gathered together tightened a noose around my chest. I ate quickly, mechanically, praying no one noticed me, praying the meal would end before another storm erupted. But storms were constant. It didn't matter if I spilled water, if I breathed too loudly, if I looked at my father at the wrong time. Everything I did seemed to be a mistake, waiting for punishment. Seeds of loneliness. At that table, loneliness grew like weeds in the cracks of my heart. I sat inches away from my family, yet felt galaxies apart. No matter how hard I tried, bringing home good grades, cleaning the house, obeying every rule, it was never enough. They never saw me. Not truly. They only saw the mistakes. I began to believe maybe they were right. Maybe I was nothing but a mistake. The breaking point one night. I accidentally dropped my chopsticks. The sound echoed against the walls, sharp and accusing. Before I could pick them up, my mother's hand struck my face. The sting spread across my cheek, my ears ringing. My sister clapped, laughing so hard tears rolled down her face. And my father? He smirked again, that same cruel smirk, like a stamp of approval. That was the night something inside me cracked. That was the night I stopped hoping the dinner table would ever be a place of love. Because in my home, the dinner table was never about family. It was about breaking me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Children crave attention, a smile, a gentle word, a hug at the end of the day. But I grew up with none of those things. From the moment I could remember, I was the invisible child. The ghost in the room. In every family photo, I was there, but not really. I stood at the corner, smiling awkwardly, while my sister shone in the center like the star everyone adored. Relatives pinched her cheeks, praised her beauty, handed her gifts. And me? I was the background, the blur no one noticed. At birthdays, candles were lit, songs were sung, but the warmth never reached me. Even on my own birthday, the cake was small, rushed, forgotten within minutes. My parents barely looked up from their phones. I remember staring at the flickering candles, wishing just once they would look at me the way they looked at my sister. With pride, with love, with anything but indifference. School, a temporary escape school, should have been my safe place. And in some ways, it was. Teachers praised me for my grades. Friends envied how I always finished homework on time. I clung to those moments like a lifeline. At school, I wasn't invisible. I was someone. But even then, the shadows of home followed me. When other kids' parents came to cheer at school events, Mine didn't show up. When I won an award, my classmates' families took pictures, clapped, celebrated. My parents? They didn't even ask what I had won. I carried the certificates home, tucked them carefully into a folder, and placed them on the kitchen table, hoping they'd notice. They never did. The folder remained untouched, gathering dust, a silent monument to the love I never received. Trying harder, fading faster. I thought maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe if I became the perfect daughter, they would finally see me. So I studied harder, cleaned the house without being asked, cooked meals when my mother was tired, laughed at my father's jokes even when they weren't funny. I gave everything I had, but the harder I tried, the faster I faded. Because no matter what I did, it was never enough. If I scored 95 on a test, my mother asked why it wasn't 100. If I cleaned the living room, she complained about the dust in the corner. If I brought home a certificate, my father muttered, "It doesn't matter. Real life isn't about grades." My sister, on the other hand, could do no wrong. Even when she failed, they excused her. Even when she was cruel to me, they laughed it off as sibling rivalry. It was clear. She was the daughter they wanted. I was the burden they tolerated. Loneliness in a crowded house. Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about being surrounded by people who refuse to see you. At night, I lay in bed listening to the sound of my family in the next room. Laughter, conversations, the TV blaring. I pressed a pillow over my ears, trying to block it out, because every sound reminded me that I wasn't part of it. Sometimes, I sat on the staircase, just listening, hoping someone would notice me sitting there, invite me to join. But they never did. I was living in the same house, breathing the same air, but I might as well have been a shadow. The hunger for love. I didn't want money. I didn't want gifts. All I wanted was love, a pat on the head, a good job, a hug after a long day. Simple things that cost nothing, but to me, they were treasures beyond reach. When I was little, I used to draw pictures and place them on the fridge, hoping my parents would smile and say, "That's beautiful." Instead, my drawings disappeared, tossed away without a word. I learned to stop drawing. I learned to stop hoping. Because every ignored effort cut deeper than any insult. The silent conversations invisible children become experts in silent conversations. I spoke to myself in whispers. I comforted myself when no one else did. I told myself stories at night, stories where I was loved, where I was wanted, where a family looked at me with warmth instead of contempt. These imaginary worlds became my refuge, because in reality, the only voice that ever spoke kindly to me was my own. Seeds of self-doubt. Being invisible doesn't just make you lonely, it makes you doubt your own existence. I began to wonder, if I disappeared tomorrow, would they notice? Would they care? Or would the house simply go on, filled with the same laughter, the same conversations, as if I had never been there? That thought haunted me. It wrapped around my chest like chains, dragging me deeper into despair. Because the truth was, I wasn't just invisible to them. I was becoming invisible to myself. The weight of silence. Every family has a story. Some are filled with love, others with lessons. Mine was filled with silence. A silence heavier than words, louder than screams. At the dinner table, in the living room, even on birthdays. That silence told me one thing over and over again. You don't matter. You never did. And the more I believed it, the harder it became to fight. The child who faded. By the time I was a teenager, I no longer fought for attention. I no longer begged for recognition. I accepted my role. The invisible child, the background character in my own life. But deep inside, a tiny voice still whispered, maybe one day, someone will see me. Maybe one day, I won't be invisible. That fragile hope was the only thing keeping me alive. But as the years went by, even that hope began to dim. Because how long can a child wait to be seen before disappearing completely? Every family has cracks. Some are small, arguments that heal with time. But in my family, those cracks became canyons, splitting my heart wide open. What began as silence and neglect soon turned into something sharper. Betrayal, humiliation, and a kind of emotional cruelty that left scars I still carry today. This isn't just a sad family drama. This is a heartbreaking childhood story, told from the eyes of a child who only wanted to be loved. The day I was accused. I'll never forget the night when a vase shattered in the living room. It wasn't me. I wasn't even there when it broke. But when my mother stormed into the kitchen, eyes blazing, she didn't ask questions. She didn't wait for answers. She pointed straight at me. "You did this!" she screamed, grabbing my arm so tight I thought her nails would pierce my skin. My sister stood behind her, lips twitching with a secret smile. She had been the one playing carelessly near the table. She knew it. I knew it. But she said nothing. My father? He only shook his head in disappointment, as if the verdict had already been sealed. I tried to defend myself. I begged them to believe me. But no one listened. That was the night I learned the truth. In my family's eyes, I was always guilty, always the problem, always the scapegoat. And the worst part? The silence of my sister, the smirk of my father, the cold rage of my mother. Together, they carved another crack in my heart, a crack that would never heal. Small cuts, deep wounds. People often think pain comes from big events, screaming fights, broken bones, slammed doors. But sometimes the deepest wounds are cut quietly. Like when I brought home a drawing I was proud of, only to watch my mother crumple it without even looking. Or when my father praised my sister's failing grades as at least she tried, while ignoring my perfect scores. Or when my sister mimicked the way I walked, the way I talked, making the whole family laugh at my expense. These moments might sound small, but to a child, they were earthquakes. Each laugh, each shrug, each dismissal chipped away at me until I no longer recognized myself. This is the kind of detail that makes an emotional story video powerful. Not just the screaming, but the quiet cruelty that destroys a child from the inside out. Betrayal by silence. What hurt the most wasn't the yelling. It wasn't even the slaps. It was the silence of my father when he could have defended me. The silence of my sister when she could have told the truth. The silence of my mother after the storm, as if nothing had happened, as if my tears were invisible. That silence betrayed me. That silence told me, you're not worth protecting. And betrayal from strangers is painful, but betrayal from family is unbearable. The mirror of shame. When you're told you're worthless long enough, you begin to believe it. I stood in front of the mirror one night, staring at my reflection. All I saw was failure. All I heard were their voices echoing in my head. You're useless. You're a burden. You'll never be good enough. That reflection wasn't me. It was the version of myself my family had created, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't scrape those words off my skin. A heart that stopped hoping. I once believed things would change, that if I was patient, if I loved them enough, they'd eventually love me back. But every disappointment was another crack in the heart. Every broken promise, every cruel laugh, every ignored effort, another fracture. Until one day, my heart stopped hoping. I stopped waiting for, "I'm proud of you." I stopped waiting for hugs that never came. I stopped waiting to be chosen, seen, loved. And when a child stops hoping, something inside begins to die. A true emotional story, hidden behind closed doors. To the world, we were still the perfect family. People outside saw smiles, celebrations, and harmony. But behind closed doors, our house was a stage for cruelty. And I was the main character in a sad family drama no one else could see. That's why this isn't just my story. It's a true emotional story that countless invisible children live every day. Children who smile at school but cry at home. Children who appear strong but are breaking inside. Children whose hearts are filled with cracks too deep to mend. The cracks that define me. Some scars fade, others become part of who you are. The cracks in my heart didn't disappear. They shaped me. They defined me. They reminded me of every moment I begged for love and received cruelty instead. And though I tried to patch them, to hide them, to pretend they weren't there, the truth is, every crack whispered the same haunting message. You are unloved. You are unwanted. You are invisible. And when a child grows up believing that, the consequences are devastating. This is not just storytelling. This is emotional storytelling at its rawest, because it shows how an innocent heart can be shattered not by strangers, but by the very people who were supposed to protect it. And the cracks in my heart were only beginning. There are two kinds of screams, the loud ones that shake walls, and the silent ones that tear you apart from the inside. By the time I reached my teenage years, I no longer screamed out loud. I carried my screams in silence, hidden, invisible, unheard. This is the part of my life where the sad family drama turned darker, where my heartbreaking childhood story became less about physical pain and more about the kind of emotional suffocation that leaves you gasping for air. The smile that wasn't mine at school, people saw me smile. Teachers complimented my positive energy. Friends thought I was calm, responsible, mature for my age. But what they didn't know was that my smile was a mask, carefully painted, perfectly rehearsed. Behind that mask lived the silent scream. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to say, "I'm breaking. I'm not okay. Please see me." But the fear of being judged, of being dismissed the way my family dismissed me, kept me quiet. So instead of speaking, I laughed when I was supposed to laugh. I nodded when I was supposed to nod. I played my role, because sometimes pretending to be fine feels safer than admitting you're not. When friends noticed some friends noticed cracks in the mask. "Are you okay?" they'd ask when they caught me staring too long at nothing. "You look tired," they'd say when I avoided eye contact. I always gave the same answer. "I'm fine." 2 words. So easy to say, so hard to believe. The truth? I was far from fine. I was drowning. But my scream was silent, and silence doesn't draw attention. At home, the weight of dismissal. At home, I tried once, just once, to let the scream out. I told my mother I felt sad. I told her I felt invisible, like nothing I did mattered. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask why. She didn't listen. Instead, she rolled her eyes. "Stop being dramatic. You're too sensitive. Other kids have real problems. You should be grateful you even have a home." Her words cut deeper than any slap. That was the day I realized my emotions were unwelcome in my own house. My feelings weren't valid. My pain wasn't real to them. So I swallowed it all down. Every tear, every fear, every desperate cry for help. Another silent scream added to the collection. The quiet withdrawal. The more I silenced myself, the further I drifted away from the world. I stopped sharing stories with friends. I stopped joining after-school activities. I stopped answering phone calls. Isolation became my shield. But here's the cruel irony. The more I hid, the more invisible I became. And the more invisible I became, the louder the silent scream grew inside me. It echoed in the quiet moments before sleep, in the hollow sound of laughter I didn't feel, in the constant thudding of my heart that whispered, "You're alone. You're unwanted. You don't belong." This wasn't just an emotional story video anymore. This was my life. A life unraveling in silence. The body remembers. Silence doesn't erase pain, it buries it. And buried pain always finds a way out. For me, it showed in my body. Headaches that never left, sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, stomach aches that twisted into knots every time I heard my mother's footsteps. Doctors called it stress. I called it survival. My body carried the silent scream I couldn't voice. And every ache was proof of the true emotional story hidden inside me. The unheard cry. One night, I sat in my room with the lights off, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I wanted to scream, to shout, to let the world know how much it hurt. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, tears streamed down silently, soaking my pillow, leaving no evidence by morning. That was my reality. Screaming without noise. Breaking without witnesses. And the cruelest part? No one even noticed. Family rejection, the final silence. When families reject your voice, they don't just silence your words, they silence your soul. I tried again, once more, to speak. I told my father I felt like I didn't matter. He laughed, not cruelly, not angrily, just dismissively. A laugh that said, "You're not serious. Stop being ridiculous." My sister chimed in, mocking. There she goes again, playing the victim. Their laughter filled the room. My silence filled me. That was the moment I stopped trying. Because why scream if no one is listening? Why cry out if no one cares? Why speak if every word will be turned into a joke? A heartbreaking story, hidden in silence. This is why I call it a heartbreaking story. Not because of what was said, but because of what was never heard. The silence was my cage. The silence was my punishment. The silence was the scream no one cared to hear. And in that silence, I lost myself, piece by piece. The birth of despair. Despair doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly, disguised as exhaustion, numbness, apathy. I no longer cared about grades. I no longer cared about friends. I no longer cared about myself. I was a body going through motions, a shell moving through life, a ghost inhabiting a world that didn't see me. And yet, inside, the scream never stopped. It pounded against my ribs, echoing in my mind, begging to be released. But no matter how loud it grew, no one heard it. Because a silent scream, by definition, is invisible. This isn't just my emotional storytelling. This is the truth of so many invisible children whose cries for help are disguised as silence. And the most terrifying part? Silence doesn't last forever. Eventually, it breaks. And when it does, the consequences can change everything. Every story has a breaking point. Mine came one night, in the quiet of my room, when the house around me buzzed with the same cruel laughter and indifference I had known all my life. That was the night of the 3 texts. The night I decided enough was enough. This is the scene people remember when they watch an emotional story video. The moment when silence turns into action, when pain becomes a decision. But for me, it wasn't a performance. It was reality. Of the final dinner. It began at the dinner table, like so many of my nightmares. I spilled a drop of soy sauce on the table. Just one drop. My mother's hand came down hard, smacking the back of my head. "Useless!" she hissed. My sister laughed so loud she nearly choked on her food. My father smirked, eyes shining with the same cold amusement. I sat there, cheeks burning, heart pounding, but this time something was different. The humiliation didn't sting the way it used to. It felt hollow, like I had finally gone numb. I finished my meal in silence, stood up, and went to my room. And for the first time, I didn't cry. The glow of the phone. In the darkness of my room, the only light came from my phone screen. It glowed faintly, like a lifeline, like a doorway to a world where maybe someone would hear me. I opened the messaging app. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. This wasn't just texting. This was a scream disguised as words. The scream I had swallowed for years. The scream no one at home ever cared to hear. Tonight, someone would hear it. Text 1 to my best friend. The first text went to my best friend. She had been the only person who ever asked twice when I said, "I'm fine." The only one who looked at me long enough to see the cracks. I typed, "Thank you for being the only one who ever cared. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. Please don't blame yourself." My finger hovered over the send button. Tears blurred my vision, but I pressed it. And just like that, my secret world was no longer mine alone. Text 2, to the one I loved. The second text was harder. There was someone I had loved quietly, from the sidelines, too afraid to confess. They never knew. But in my heart, their smile had been the one light in my darkest days. I typed, "I wish I had told you sooner. You made me feel seen, even if you didn't realize it. I hope you find happiness. Goodbye." It wasn't a love letter. It was a farewell. But in that moment, it felt like the closest thing to love I had ever given or received. Text 3, to myself. The last text was the hardest. How do you write to yourself when you don't even believe you deserve words? How do you comfort the child inside you who was never comforted? Still, I typed, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry no one loved you the way you deserved. I'm sorry you spent your whole life trying to be enough. You were always enough. They just never saw it." I read those words again and again, tears dripping onto the screen. For the first time, I spoke to myself with kindness. It was too late, but it was real. The silence after sending. When the last text was sent, the room fell silent. No vibrations, No replies, just silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was the silence of release. The silence of finally letting go. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange calm wash over me. This wasn't happiness. It wasn't peace. It was emptiness. And emptiness, after years of pain, almost felt like relief. The unanswered questions. Did I want someone to stop me? Maybe. Maybe that's why I sent the texts. Did I want my family to notice? No. By then, I already knew they wouldn't. The heartbreaking truth is that my 3 texts weren't just goodbyes. They were a last attempt at being seen, being remembered, being loved. Because even in the darkest moment, the invisible child still longed to be visible. The weight of that night, people often ask in emotional storytelling videos, what pushes someone to the edge? It isn't one big event. It's the collection of small moments. Every laugh at your expense, every ignored effort, every cruel silence. That night wasn't just about spilled soy sauce. It was about every crack in my heart, every silent scream, every moment I felt like nothing. And together, they led me here. 3 texts, 3 goodbyes, 1 decision. A sad family drama no one saw. The saddest part of this sad family drama is that my parents didn't even notice I was in my room that night, breaking apart. They were in the living room, watching TV, laughing with my sister. Their world went on, untouched, while mine ended behind a closed door. That's the cruelty of neglect. It isn't loud. It isn't violent. It's quiet, silent, invisible, and it destroys you all the same. The cliff before the fall. As I stared at my phone one last time, I thought about those 3 texts. Would my friend cry? Would the one I loved regret never noticing? Would my words to myself matter after I was gone? I didn't know. I didn't care. All I knew was that my story, my true emotional story, had reached its climax. And once the send button was pressed, there was no going back. That night, I didn't scream out loud. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I simply pressed send. And in the quiet that followed, I ended it all. The night of the 3 texts ended not with screams, not with slammed doors, not with anyone rushing in to stop me. It ended in silence. That silence stretched into the dawn, into the hours that followed, into the aftermath that nobody in my family was prepared to face. And yet, even then, the world outside went on turning. Birds sang, cars rushed down the street, the sun painted the curtains gold. Life went on, but inside that house, something had ended. The first discovery. It was my best friend who noticed first. She woke up to the vibration of her phone, blinking at the message I had sent in the middle of the night. At first, she thought it was a bad dream, a dramatic line written in exhaustion. But as she read it again, her chest tightened. Thank you for being the only one who ever cared. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. Please don't blame yourself. Those weren't just words. They were a goodbye. Her fingers trembled as she tried to call me again and again. No answer. She messaged. No reply. Panic took hold. She called another friend, then the police, then, finally, my parents. And that was when my silence began to unravel into chaos. My family's reaction. The call came early, maybe 6 a.m. My father answered. At first, he was annoyed. "Why are you calling so early?" Then his face changed. My mother rushed over. My sister leaned in, confused. And for the first time in their lives, they heard what no one wanted to believe. "Your child might not be okay. You need to check right now." The phone slipped from my father's hand. My mother screamed my name. My sister stood frozen, laughter long gone. It was as if the house itself had cracked open. But here's the bitter truth of this sad family drama. The realization came too late. The bedroom door. The bedroom door, once just a barrier between me and their cruelty, suddenly became something else. A wall of fear. They pounded on it, voices rising in desperation. "Open the door! Answer us! Please, don't do this!" But there was no reply. The silence inside my room was louder than any words I could have spoken. This was the silence of years of neglect, years of pain, years of being unseen, all condensed into one locked door. The arrival of strangers. When the paramedics arrived, the air shifted. These strangers, who had never known my name, showed more urgency, more care, more humanity in a few minutes than my own family had shown me in a lifetime. They rushed down the hallway, equipment clattering, voices urgent but steady. My parents stood back, helpless. My sister cried quietly, guilt painted across her face. The door was broken open. Light flooded in. And there I was, fragile, pale, silent. The weight of silence. In emotional storytelling videos, people often imagine dramatic wails, desperate embraces, families begging for forgiveness. But the truth? Silence weighed heavier than sound. My mother couldn't speak. My father's smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow stare. My sister wept into her hands. It wasn't the kind of crying that asked for sympathy. It was the kind that comes when the mirror finally cracks, and you see the monster you've been. But none of it could change what had already been done. Whispers in the hospital. The ambulance carried me away. Machines beeped, oxygen hissed, strangers worked to keep me alive. In the waiting room, my family sat in silence. For once, there were no cruel words, no mocking laughter, no smirks. But silence wasn't peace. It was guilt. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't look at each other. They sat there, drowning in a truth they couldn't escape. They had driven me here. And yet, even as they sat there, part of me wondered, was it too late for them to change? The ripples of 3 texts. Outside the hospital walls, my 3 texts began to ripple outward. My best friend posted a desperate message online. "If anyone knows where they are, please help. Don't let this be the end." The one I loved saw my words and cried quietly, whispering my name into the dark. And somewhere in my phone, the last text, the one I had written to myself, remained unread, unsent to anyone else but me. A heartbreaking story had been born, carried now by everyone who read those words. That's the strange power of pain. Once shared, it multiplies. The family's reckoning. For my family, the aftermath was not just about waiting in a sterile hospital corridor. It was about facing years of denial. It was about realizing the bruises they had left weren't visible on my skin. They were carved into my soul. Every slap, every laugh, every smirk. All of it had led to this moment. And now, they couldn't undo it. No apology could erase the silence of that night. No tears could rewrite the 3 texts. The reckoning had come, and it was merciless. The silence that remained. I don't know if silence can haunt a place, but I believe it can. After that night, the dinner table was never the same. The laughter was gone. The smirks disappeared. Even the clatter of dishes felt heavy. In its place was a silence that whispered of everything unspoken, everything ignored, everything lost. That silence became the true punishment, not just for them, but for everyone left behind. More than just a story. For those who watch this as an emotional story video, maybe it feels like just another piece of emotional storytelling, another heartbreaking childhood story to cry over for a few minutes. But for me, this wasn't fiction. It was the cost of neglect, the result of cruelty, the truth behind closed doors. And maybe, just maybe, if someone watching listens closely, they'll hear the warning inside the silence. Because silence, left unchecked, doesn't just break hearts, it ends lives. Closing the chapter. That night of the 3 texts changed everything. It exposed the cracks in my family. It shattered the illusion of normalcy. It dragged all the hidden pain into the light. But most of all, it left behind a silence that none of us could escape. And that silence, heavier than words, sharper than screams, became the true ending of my story. When the storm passes, it never truly leaves silence behind. It leaves echoes, and those echoes carry further than we ever expect. The night of the 3 texts became the moment everything fractured in my family. But beyond the immediate aftermath and silence, something lingered, something that would echo for years to come. This is the part of the emotional ending that people often don't see. Not just the heartbreak, not just the hospital room, but the long, aching shadow that follows. The echo inside my parents. For my mother, the echo was guilt. She replayed every moment, every slap, every harsh word, every time she had turned her anger on me instead of asking why I was hurting. She could no longer wash the dishes without remembering the sound of her hand striking my cheek. She could no longer stand at the dinner table without hearing the silence that followed my tears. She cried often, but not the sharp, angry tears of old. These were quiet tears, ones she tried to hide in the bathroom, muffled behind running water. The echo from my father was different. His smirk was gone, but in its place was a weight he couldn't shake. He stared at the walls, at his reflection, at the empty chair at the table. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. His silence was louder than any of his old, mocking smiles. And my sister? Her echo was regret. The laughter that once bubbled so easily turned sour. She told her friends she didn't mean it, that she thought she was just joking, that she didn't know it would go that far. But deep down, she knew. She knew every giggle had been a dagger, and she couldn't take them back. These were the echoes that followed them, haunting reminders that cruelty always leaves scars, not just on the victim, but on everyone who survives the aftermath. The echo inside me. For me, the echo was survival. I didn't vanish that night. The hospital lights, the urgent hands, the voices of strangers, they pulled me back into a world I wasn't sure I wanted to return to. Recovery wasn't a sudden sunrise. It was slow, fragile, uncertain. Some days I opened my eyes and wished I hadn't. Other days I found small sparks of light, my best friend holding my hand, a nurse whispering kind words, a stranger leaving flowers by my bed. And in those moments, I realized something. The echo inside me wasn't just pain, it was also resilience. This is what makes a heartbreaking but inspiring story. Not the tragedy itself, but the fact that in the rubble, something still grows. Lessons in the echo. When people watch an emotional storytelling video like this, they often ask, "What's the lesson? What can we learn?" The lesson is simple, but heavy. Words matter. Laughter matters. Silence matters. Every choice we make in a family, every smirk, every slap, every cruel joke, it plants a seed. Some seeds grow into love, others grow into wounds, and wounds, if ignored, can become unbearable. My story is not unique. Around the world, countless children sit at dinner tables, invisible and unheard, wondering if anyone would notice if they disappeared. That's why this isn't just my story. It's a mirror held up to every family that hides its fractures behind closed doors. The echo beyond the family. The echo of my 3 texts reached further than I ever imagined. Friends who once teased me began to think twice before joking about pain. Teachers who never noticed started checking in on their students more closely. Even strangers, when they heard what happened, carried the echo into their own lives, vowing to listen more, to care more, to never dismiss someone's silent cry for help. That's the strange, terrible beauty of tragedy. It teaches, even at the highest cost. This is why stories like mine matter. This is why sad family drama is more than entertainment. It's a warning, an emotional ending that carries the weight of truth. Breaking the cycle. As time passed, I realized something important. The echo could either haunt me or guide me. I chose to let it guide me. I began to write, to speak, to tell my true emotional story not just as a victim, but as a survivor. Each word was a way of turning silence into voice, pain into meaning. My family, fractured as it was, began to shift. My mother reached out more. My father softened. My sister apologized, not once, but many times, until the words no longer felt like empty air. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But the cycle was beginning to break. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting the echo, but learning how to live with it, how to turn it into something that inspires instead of destroys. The emotional ending. So here I am, years later, looking back at the night of the 3 texts. I could tell you that everything is fine now, that my family is whole, that the pain is gone. But that wouldn't be the truth. The truth is, scars remain, echoes remain, but so does strength, so does resilience, so does the hope that by sharing my story, someone else will see themselves in it and choose to stay, to fight, to speak. This isn't just my heartbreaking childhood story. It's a lesson, a plea, an echo I want you to carry with you. The echo that remains. If you remember nothing else, remember this. No cruel word is ever harmless. No child is ever truly invisible. And no silence is ever empty. It always carries something, whether it's pain or hope. My silence nearly ended me, but my voice now carries the echo forward. And if you are listening, truly listening, then maybe that echo will reach you too. Because in the end, stories don't just end. They remain. They echo. They inspire. And that is the echo that remains. Closing call to action, SEO optimized. If this heartbreaking but inspiring story touched you, please don't let it fade into silence. Hit the like button if you believe no child should ever feel invisible. Share this emotional storytelling video with someone who might need the reminder that words, kindness, and empathy truly matter. And don't forget to subscribe for more sad family drama, true emotional stories, and inspiring life lessons learned. Your support not only helps this channel grow, but also spreads awareness, turning painful echoes into voices of hope. Together, we can make sure no story like this is ever ignored again.